Hello, folks. Hi there. I'm up a little bit early today. Just want to make sure, always want to make sure the tech is working. Uh, so good to see some folks are already in here. I'm glad to see that that's working. I know you're probably missing the great intro that my producer put together. He's not watching the Super Bowl. He's actually doing some work tonight, unfortunately. And yeah, Medic Jesus. Yeah, I haven't watched the Super Bowl. Probably I'm trying to think if I've watched some halftime shows. I have not watched the Super Bowl. I am not a sports fan in general, although I might take a look at a couple things in the Olympics here and there, which is maybe a little bit odd considering my dad was a producer for NBC Sports and then produced other stuff. I've been to football games and baseball games and even worked them when I was growing up. So that's as a young man, I worked some of the baseball games. All right. Well, we're almost at the time that the show officially starts, but let's call this the official start of Ask Professor Paranormal, episode 66. Kind of hard to believe that it's that many. Um, and I welcome everybody who's already here. And thank you for coming to see me instead of the Super Bowl. So appreciate that. I will mention that I am toying with the idea, and I think I'm probably going to do this, that I will be at some point doing some pre-taped or pre-recorded interviews with some of my colleagues or other people. However, those will just go up in the channel. They will not be in the Ask Professor Paranormal channel, of course. They will not be a live show. So they won't be in place of these shows. I've decided that it makes sense for me to do that when I can, as opposed to trying to schedule people on a Sunday night. So with that said, anyone have anything they want to get started with? Otherwise, I'll kind of run into my typical rambling start of everything. And I'm not seeing anything here, but it's good to see some folks here at this point. And I don't see anything as yet. Okay. Other than the reference to the Super Bowl. So at the moment I'm teaching, I just started teaching this past week, and it's still available if you want to jump in. Teaching a field investigations course. It's kind of the basic, think of it as a basic ghost hunting course, but it's the thing about the way we do field investigations in parapsychology. It's similar but different to what you see on TV. Because we're emphasizing the experience that people have and not so much that, certainly don't emphasize the tech at all. And in fact, the thing that is most important to truly understand is that there's no equipment, as far as we know, that definitively detects ghosts. It may be that a ghost can affect an EMF meter, and a ghost might affect the environment in other ways, or hauntings do seem to correlate to changes in certain environmental conditions. That seems to be the correlations. We can't determine causation that way, but we can't, unless we know what things are made out of, we can't develop a device to detect them. So it may be by accident some of these things are detecting stuff. But I will tell you very honestly that in the times that I've been using various forms of equipment over the years, in haunting cases, I found in a large number of them, I do find a connection or correlation between unusual magnetic fields and the experience, or the places, the spots that people are experiencing something. With apparitions, it's all over the map. I mean, there's no direct correlation, no connection. I've had so many cases where we've had really good evidence of an apparition being present, nothing on the sensors at all, other than the human sensors. So it's important to understand the limitations of equipment, when in fact people are I understand they're buying into, because it's exciting, the claims of the people who manufacture and sell the devices and the TV shows. Television started using this equipment because it was visual. And I'll tell you right now that in the 1980s, when I really started doing TV, especially after Ghostbusters, every producer or director I work with outside the studio, other than the studio interview, were always asking, do you have anything that lights up and makes noise? That's what they wanted. It had to light up and make noise, because they weren't things like, they knew it wasn't like Ghostbusters. So that's been a piece of what has been designed for a really long time. It's what the TV shows need, because TV is a visual medium. It's not, it's something else. And then the EVP thing, there's no guarantee you're getting a spirit. You might be getting a little bit of place memory, a haunting recording. You might be getting one of the living people causing an effect on the device. And you might even just simply be making a mistake, trying to fit what you're getting to what your questions are. I do teach a class, so I'm teaching the field investigations class. People can join that still. We just finished with week 1. You're okay joining for a couple of weeks. It's all recorded. You can jump in the participation, whether you want to get a grade or not, either way. And then in March, I'll be teaching a course specifically looking at technology, both old tech and new tech. So this will include things like a Ouija board and automatic writing, but also, of course, we'll talk about EVP and cameras and all sorts of other stuff, environmental sensors. So that's a course that the Ryan Center is going to be offering starting the first week of March on Thursday nights. And just to remind everybody, I'm going to put in, even though the link is in the channel description, so I'm just going to put that in here anyway. We have other classes. There actually is a class on learning to do out-of-body experience, out-of-body work. Graham Watkins is teaching that. So I encourage you to, if you're interested in experiencing something, that's a cool thing to experience. Later this year, we'll be doing a remote viewing class taught by Paul Smith, and I'll be teaching a just basic developing your ESP kind of class as well. All right, let's see what we got here. Bringing in the darkness to the light. Okay. I have a question. Been any paranormal investigation in a place like how caverns, like an underground location or mine area? There certainly have been people who have gone into supposedly haunted mines. There are haunted mines in the gold country here in the Bay, outside the Bay Area. And people have experienced stuff there. And I don't know of any certainly not any concerted efforts from people in the field of parapsychology. I'm sure that there have been ghost hunters who've gone into those places. And I haven't heard of caverns that have been haunted, because caverns are usually not places of normal human activity, or a lot of human activity other than tourists. So maybe if a tourist dies in a cavern. But the mines, are human-centric. So definitely I'd expect there to be residual haunting type stuff, place memory. That would make a lot of sense in those places. Don't know about ghosts. It's not the case that people haunt when they're dead and they're ghosts. They don't necessarily haunt where they died. They typically go where they lived. So unless they were really attached to mining, I can't imagine a deceased miner, hanging around in the mine. Just like it makes no sense for any of the people who died on Alcatraz Island, who are prisoners, to stay there after death. Makes no sense at all. Lots of place memory, lots of residual haunting, but it makes no sense. Those guys always just wanted to get out of there. So different kind of situation. Hop along catastrophe. Oh, I'm very sorry to hear your mother passed. That's very sad. It's always sad when someone we care about passed, or just even friends for that matter. All right. Have there been studies of the brains of psychics compared to those who do not seem to have such abilities biologically? To some extent, it's difficult. There's been nothing I've seen of psychics who have had their brains analyzed, you might say, or studied. However, that's part of the issue is when they're not being psychic, they're just being normal. So unless there was some structure in the brain that was drastically different, which is not the case, there's been no identification of necessarily the ESP center of the brain. However, over the last few years, there have been studies of mediums, evidential mediums, who they have a distinct advantage. They can turn it on and off, kind of open themselves up or not. And some of them do psychic readings of living people as well. And the brain studies, mostly EEG, but there's been some other fMRI studies as well, have shown, and this is something that, if you ever talk to skeptics and they say that all the mediums are phonies, when somebody says somebody's a phony or fraud, that fraud is being done intentionally. They're saying that people are conning you intentionally. Fact is that these brain studies have shown, and of course, is not a blanket statement for everybody who claims to be a medium at all, because there are phonies out there. But the mediums in study, the evidential mediums, many of whom are connected to the Winbridge Research Center or the Forever Family Foundation. They have a different brain state, very clearly different state, via their EEG readings and again in other forms of brain activity, between having a conversation with the researcher, in other words, even pretending to talk to a spirit, those who do psychic readings, as well as talking to the dead. Their brain state when they're doing a reading of a living person is different, and it's even more different than with communicating with spirit. So those people, I mean, and I've had this conversation with some of the so-called skeptics, the true pseudo skeptics. Even if it's not psychic, they believe it, and there's something happening in their brains that indicates that they're not in a normal brain state of intentionality. So even if you don't believe in any of this stuff, those people are not phonies. They're not fraudulent. They're believing with it any more than the pseudo skeptic who totally ignores evidence is fraudulent. Although they're, I think, kind of unethical in that sense. So, and oh, John, okay, that's who you are. Good to see you. All right. And Kathy, speaking of mediums, Kathy Nadal is a great medium that we have for the Forever Family Foundation. Thank you for joining. Yeah, so, we'd like, one of the problems in our field in parapsychology is lack of funding. Now, fortunately, although I haven't seen how it's going to go out yet, there was a £2 million donation, British pounds, to the Society for Psychical Research by a gentleman who was going to leave it in his will, but decided he'd rather see the work go on now. And I know that they're going to be doing grants. I think they're like $5,000 to $10,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's not necessarily a lot of money, but it could lead to other funding as well. They're going to look for proposals, and I have an idea. I'm going to be thinking about trying to create a proposal for this. Really mainly focused on survival of bodily death. So that would include apparitions, for example, or mediumship, or out-of-body experiences, or near-death experiences, just coming up with the appropriate studies for that sort of stuff. So I think we may actually see some movement in that direction from the SPR as well. You could probably, I don't, Dan Aykroyd is definitely aware of people in our field. There's no question. In fact, I know for a fact that he spent a day at the library of the American Society for Psychical Research in 1980, I want to say 82, might have been kind of early 83, but it was at that point in time, doing research for the script for Ghostbusters. I know this for a fact because I was working at the ASPR at the time. And unfortunately, I was only working part-time, and this was not a day that I was working. But everyone else who was working had a chance to interact with Dan Aykroyd. He is also aware of the field in many respects because he was involved with executive producer and a host for a bit of that TV show Sci Factor in the 90s. It'd be great if he got involved with the field of parapsychology. I think he's more interested in UFOs these days. But you say you could probably reach out to Dan Aykroyd. You want to get me contact information? I'm happy to do that. We would love to do that. And actually, I got someone who knows somebody who knows him, and they are trying to reach out to him to try to get him for an interview for this show. The fact is that there are many people, actors and other folks. Some have actually donated money over the years. The American Society for Psychical Research, unfortunately, no longer exists. But Aykroyd, both Dan and his brother Peter, were members back in the early 80s for a while. I don't know how long that actually lasted. I didn't see the membership after I left the organization. And then there are other people, Lou Ayres, some of you may not know who that is, but he was an older actor who was very popular in the 40s and 50s and did a little TV in the 60s. He was a member. Jackie Gleason was very interested in reincarnation and was a supporting member of the ASPR for a while until his death. And in fact, apparently had an amazing library about the paranormal. about parapsychology as well. So there are people like that. We don't really get much from those folks. The folks who have been helping our field have been, interestingly enough, some of the mediums, not people who are just mildly interested, or even Dan Aykroyd is definitely interested. I mean, his father wrote a book on the history of ghosts, which is a pretty good book, and his grandfather was an investigator for the Canadian Society at one point. So definitely firm believers, but we can't, we need to get them to provide us with support in some way. We've had fortunate support in a couple of ways through the Ryan Research Center, but none of that, that's really mainly supporting the organization and not specific research for that. Dan made a lot of visits to Lilydale. I'm not surprised. Lilydale's a fascinating place to go to, as it happens. And there were other places like, Casadega in Florida and other places. And, the fact is that there are a lot of people who consult psychics, many of whom are very, very wealthy. I think in general, psychics I've talked to who've told me they had very wealthy clients. It's like, have you ever thought to ask them to help fund this stuff? And I found some of the mediums are interested in that. I don't find a lot of psychics are terribly interested in helping the scientists. This is something, just an observation of my own, that spirit mediums tend to be more curious about their own abilities and actually what the scientists have been researching. Much more curious than so many of the psychics I've met over the years, who just know it. They're kind of like artists, so they know what they can do, and that's about it. So let's see, are there risks, or have there been cases of OBE that had a negative effect on the experiencers versus positive? I think that the majority of people who experience an out-of-body experience, the definitive stereotyped common experience is somebody is laying in bed, usually either very, very relaxed, falling asleep, or just waking up, and they suddenly find themselves on the ceiling looking down on their body. And they're so scared and freaked out by that they snap back on their body, and that's not necessarily a positive feeling. That's been reported for well over 100 years. That's a very common thing. It's not that common for people to go to other places compared to that initial experience I told you about. But when people can do that, they rarely have negative impact, although there are people who've claimed they've gone to other dimensions and such. With near-death experiences, the vast majority of those we consider true near-death experiences, where people include going out of their body and they go through the tunnel or across a bridge in some parts of the world, there's a small percentage where people have a negative experience. And it often has to do with their religious beliefs, as it happens. So mediums are also psychic. That is correct. But psychics are not always mediums. Mediumship is a psychic ability, but not every psychic is a medium. So, we have an adage in and around this thing, which is all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. And in fact, what's really interesting, and I don't see her here now, but Mariah, a medium I work with, has been part of mediumship circles here in the Bay Area and other places, and told me that when they find out she does investigations of potential apparition cases, ghosts and such, several of them, the mediums, express their fear, and can't believe she's doing that. They're afraid of ghosts, which to me is kind of bizarre. But then again, we're talking about the ghosts we're talking about here are people who have not moved to the other side versus communicating with people who have passed on, moved out of our physical world. Let's see here. A Merry Prankster. Hello. In Mexico, we believe that candles help to light the way for spirits or to help them. I think there's any truth to that. There are various cultural beliefs all over the world. I'll give another plug. I teach a course on parapsychology and anthropology, looking at cross-cultural beliefs. Usually it's in the spring for the Ryan Center. Again, another online course. There are all sorts of beliefs about the dead, about people after they've died. And, the whole idea of leading them with a candle that is, or some other form of lantern, is something that occurs in different parts of the world, but there's music sometimes to help people move on, meditations, there's all sorts of variations of that. And I think it might actually depend on whether it's useful or has an impact, would probably depend on the beliefs of the ghost. So the person who died, what do they believe? And as a common thing over the years, we've heard from witnesses and occasionally psychics and mediums I work with when going on cases who communicate with the apparition that has appeared to them. They get a communication in some way, shape, or form. A small percentage of them don't know where to go. It's not that they don't know that they're dead. They haven't moved on because they don't know where to go. And the common thing we usually hear is they didn't see the light after they died. And frankly, that is from pop culture more than anything else. The light is after you go through the tunnel, not to show you where the tunnel is. That's something that pop culture movies and things like that have done. So beliefs shape a lot of what we do, even after we've died, in many respects. What about medical intuitives helping scientists? Yeah, my late investigations partner, Annette Martin, we co-authored a book called The Ghost Detective's Guide to Haunted San Francisco, and we worked for many years together. She was a psychic and a medium, and a really fun person to be around, honestly. But she was working for years with a doctor down in San Jose as a medical intuitive, and he was testing her, studying her. Alex Tanis, who was a well-known psychic back in the 80s, early 80s, especially. Actually, the library at the Rhine Research Center, the old building, was named after him, and I assume we're going to name, once we get a new building, we're going to name the library after him. Alex worked at the American Society for Psychical Research for many years, doing research on out-of-body experience. He did investigations with Carlos Osis and Donna McCormick. I spent a lot of time with him when I was working there, whenever he was in town. And he would end up going over to Bellevue Hospital, not the psychiatric part, but he would work with cancer patients and other people to diagnose. I mean, doctors would call him when they felt that they needed to narrow down the full spectrum of tests. So they didn't want to do all the possible tests on a patient. They couldn't figure anything out from the diagnosis for sure without doing some further testing. And Alex would occasionally be called in to read the person and suggest what a direction for the testing. Annette did the same thing. And I know that Barry Taff, whose name some of you may know, who's an investigator himself, is also a medical intuitive. So the interesting thing about this is that doctors were working with these psychics, not, and Alex did do healing stuff too, but not to bring them in to heal, because that's a very dicey thing for them, but to get a clarification or a second opinion about what might be wrong with somebody who needs a diagnosis and where it's not exactly clear. Medicine's it's not really it's more of an art than a science in many respects. So medical intuition has been studied, and there is something to it for sure. Even, you can, and here's the thing for skeptics too, even if somehow they're picking up subliminal cues, like Oscar the cat. Some of you may remember reading about that one cat at the hospice center who knew when a person was going to die of cancer. So even if there's some sort of subliminal or cue that individual who calls himself a medical intuitive picks up, it's practical and useful. You don't have to say that it's real for a person to be psychic. Some of the best readers I have ever met, better than some psychics who have real ability, have been psychic entertainers who have trained themselves with good observation skills and more. And they give a better reading sometimes, may not give names, dates, and places specifically, but they give a better reading than some of the psychics do. So there may be something to that, and that's fine. If they don't want to believe in ESP or anything like that, that's okay. Okay, Tina, are you still afraid of ghosts even though you haven't seen or heard any? Tina, all I can say is that living people carry guns and knives and ghosts don't. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Lazarus, hi, good to see you here. Incarnate Paranormal. Some of Louisa and J.B. Ryan's books are amazing. Yes. And in fact, I should tell you right now that we're going to be going, those of the Ryan Center, a couple of us are going to be going through Louisa Ryan's papers from the Journal of Parapsychology going back to the 1930s and putting together a book of some of her best articles. So watch for that in a few months. There is something called Parapsychology Press that is connected to the Ryan Research Center. It publishes the Journal of Parapsychology, and the board is pushing to not only republish some of Louisa's stuff and that has not seen the light of day or would be hard for people to find, but also we're going to have some new titles too at some point. We have some other ideas we're going to play with, kind of surfacing some things that maybe people might not have seen before, or outside of the field, certainly. I'm just trying to look down if I have this book that I wanted to point. Oh, yes, I do. So I'm going to recommend a book that just came out. It's from a publisher called Curious Publications. It is not new material per se. There is some new material in it, but it's called the Malobservation Report. And if you're interested in understanding perception and how witness testimony is weird and how people misunderstand things as well, lapses of memory and things like that, there's two articles in here. There is an article called "The Possibilities of Malobservation and Lapse of Memory from a Practical Point of View" by Richard Hodgson, published in the 1800s. And S.J. Davies' article on Mr. Davies' imitations and conjuring of phenomena sometimes attributed to spirit agency. So that would be for physical mediumship, for example. There is a foreword by Matthew Tompkins, which is worth the price of the book, honestly. It's an amazing understanding of perception connected to psychic phenomena. So I do recommend this. And this is, for the most part, again, it's not new material except for Tompkins' work. And that's kind of what we're going to do for the Ryan publisher for Parapsychology Press as well. When you investigated the USS Hornet, what was the most active area, would you say? Well, first, just remember that if we're dealing with conscious apparitions, not that there weren't hotspots that I'll talk about, but if you're talking about conscious apparitions, active is where they are, and they can go throughout the ship, and that is the case. So on the Hornet, the forecastle or forecastle area of the ship, kind of at the bow of the ship, had some good activity. Command and control is another area that has had quite a bit of activity. The hangar bay has seen activity. One of the more interesting places, I don't know if it's still that active, because I think there might be some blowback from the admiral who is there. But actually, for many years, women going to the ladies' room, the ladies' head, which originally was an engine repair shop. There never was a ladies' room on the Hornet when it was in service. But women would occasionally report seeing what I think is a residual haunting of, they look in the mirror and they'd hear rattling chains, like somebody's working on the engines that are, the aircraft engines that are raised above. But also they'd see like a guy standing behind them in non-commissioned officer with his hands on his hips, like going like this. Now that actually could have been interactive in some respect. But here's the interesting part that was definitely from an interactive, multiple spirits. They get goosed. A lot of women have reported getting goosed. In fact, I was walking with some folks through an area near the medical bay, and a friend of mine in front of us, as we were kind of taking them through for the first time, her husband's next to me, and she acted like somebody had goosed her. And for whatever reason, she looked at me instead of her husband. So, and he vouched for me. Neither of us were close enough to have done that. So that's kind of active. The medical bay area is active in two different ways. There has been, again, I don't know if he's still there, somebody who worked with the chief medical officer during service of the ship, who is often in the CMO's office. Annette Martin, other psychics and mediums have communicated with him. The sick bay itself, where men were laying wounded or ill, some died there, has a really negative feeling to it, like many terminal wards do at hospitals, because people felt sad and they were ill and they were dying and all of that. So that's another area that's active. There are, we identified something like 26 fairly good hotspots throughout the ship, but they vary now too. They kind of, I think that from one of the docents, one of the conference rooms, he told me, this is a couple of years ago, he told me that he would take people, I've been on the tours more recently, but he'd take people through and they'd cut through the conference room to go to a different part of the ship as he's kind of showing the admiral's quarter or the captain's quarters and things like that. And once in a while, he'd open the door, the hatch to the conference room, and he'd see a bunch of officers sitting there, and they all turn and look at him, and there's nobody there. These are the apparitions, and he would slowly back out and tell everybody they have to go around because they're having a meeting. I've experienced sort of that myself in a different area of the ship. So pretty interesting ship, but nothing negative on the ship at all. I mean, it's all very, very positive, except for the negative feelings that's in the residual haunting from time to time. Let's see. Who would win in a fight, the Tick or Rocky and Bullwinkle? Somebody noticed my shirt. This is the Rocky and Bullwinkle horror picture show. Who would win? I'm afraid the Tick would win because the Tick is nigh invulnerable and has super strength. Yeah. So, but I think probably Rocky could outthink him pretty easily. All right. Let's see. Louisa's writings. There are a couple of books of Louisa Rhine. And for those of you who don't know who Louisa Rhine is, JB and Louisa Rhine went over to Duke University with William McDougall in the 1930s. And JB and Louisa with McDougall started the Duke University Parapsychology Laboratory, which started in 1935. 1937, they started publishing the journal. JB was more focused on laboratory research, controlled research. And Louisa was very interested and studied people's experiences outside the lab. Even did a huge analysis of about 15,000 experiences to write up, to look for kind of patterns and qualities and things like that, even to put them in categories that we use today. So the thing about parapsychology is it's two sides of a coin. It's not one thing or the other. It's both. And the two of them absolutely showed that. The Rhine Research Center is the legacy of the Duke Parapsychology Lab. When Rhine retired in 1965, at a time when people had to retire at a certain age, he took the lab off campus, probably to the pleasure of some of the psychologists who were there, and started a foundation and institute there. And eventually it's become the Rhine Research Center, which is currently looking for a new home, which we're going to buy instead of lease at this point, because we're doing pretty well. Okay, let's see what else we got here. New Frontiers in the Mind. That's J.B. Rhine. That's a good book. Tina, I don't know how many people on this in this podcast really care. I really don't. I'll just say that. The most football I've ever done over the years has been the Rose Bowl, because my dad produced the international broadcast and also produced the broadcast of the Rose Bowl for NBC before he left NBC. So I was happy to see a Northwestern game when they got into the bowl. There have been numerous amazing cases where psychics have helped to solve crime cases working with police, but yet there seems to be great resistance to openly be willing or admit that psychics help. There are several reasons why that is. One of which is that, contrary to what we see on television cop shows, police rarely bring in a consultant like Monk, or I'm watching a great show. I think it's a great show called Wild Cards. You don't bring in a con artist like Neil Cafferty from White Collar. It's not normal to do that, to have them on cases with you. There's High Potential is another hot show right now. So a psychic is another consultant. And so because police don't normally do that, they're not normally going to work with any consultants. They may consult with somebody, but they're not going to be on cases. That's number one. More importantly, psychics are not 100% right. And it depends on their ability to provide information, depends on how they work, and the police actually, or law enforcement, understanding how they work. Now, Alex Tannis absolutely was consulted by police. He didn't go out on cases, but he was consulted on cases for the NYPD, Boston PD, Philadelphia PD. The FBI, and I know this because Alex, who would come down from Maine, where he lived, every couple of weeks, this is back in the early 80s when I was working there, when he was in town, law enforcement people would consult with him at the ASPR. I met some of them. They were identified when they came because they had to sign in. We know this. I've talked to police over the years in other situations. So there are other reasons why they can't. Number one, the local community, even hiring a consultant, if it's the wrong consultant, even though they might be useful, the local community would be upset about spending taxpayer dollars. Most of the time, psychics who work with police don't get paid. It's really rare that they get paid. So there's no taxpayer dollars, except that some of the people in the community may say, well, they're wasting the police's time when they could be out there looking themselves. That's actually not what's going on. The police don't call a psychic consultant in at the beginning of a case. When they consult with psychics, it's when they are stuck. And again, I know this because I have spoken to law enforcement over the years. For quite a time when we had our parapsychology program at JFK University, and even a few years after, I would get calls from law enforcement trying to figure out they want to work with a psychic. Can I recommend somebody? Or they want to work with a psychic. We have a psychic we think is good. We don't know how to work with that person. I mean, how do we get the best information out of them? So there's no training for that in general, but there are books on psychic criminology. And there have been people like Noreen Rainier, a psychic who was lectured at Quantico years ago. The biggest problem they have is public perception. And if there's loudmouth pseudo skeptics who say this stuff is all crap, they're going to get a lot of heat from those people. The law enforcement will. If there are religious people who think it's all of the devil, they're going to get a lot of heat from those people. So there are many, many societal and other PR reasons why you don't hear about this much. And then the final thing I want to say, and this is something Annette Martin was very clear about when people would ask you, so I understand you solved a murder case, or did I didn't solve it. I gave the information to law enforcement. They solved the case. And that's the key element there. When someone has a legitimate tip and they call a tip line, they may have provided the information that helped the police solve the case and arrest somebody. They didn't solve the case. Might have been a witness, in which case, they sort of solved it, but not really. So Annette and other psychics I know of, very adamant about this. In the meantime, you have some other people who have claimed to work with police. Sylvia Brown used to do this all the time, and it was never verified. In fact, the police that she said she worked with said no. And she said, well, they're just kind of keeping it hidden. Problems with Sylvia Brown. There are other psychics I know of that were making big noise about working with cops, at which point the police stopped working with them because they were claiming that they solved the case. So if I were to hand you or point you in the direction of evidence, I didn't solve the case. They still had to get the evidence, and they had to build a case with physical evidence and witness testimony, because the psychic would not be one of those witnesses. They'd have to pull that together. And then also, in terms of knowing how to work with psychics, Annette and another psychic I know who worked police worked very, very differently. And police just don't know how to ask, how do we work best with you? They often spend way too much time trying to get the psychic to produce information that cops already knew, which Annette said is a waste of her time and their time. If they're calling in a psychic, they should believe it's possible and just try to ask questions of things they don't know. And so it's a complicated issue for that. Clearly, I have a lot to say about this. All right. Let's see here. You met Tony Shalhoub. Yeah, I loved Monk. But frankly, the role he had that I loved the best was in Galaxy Quest. And for those of you who have never seen Galaxy Quest, you are missing out on one of the best movies, space movies, science fiction movies ever made. It's a sci-fi comedy. So, who would you like to interview who starred in a paranormal movie? To interview them on being an actor versus someone with the actual skill or talent Yeah, it does make sense. I actually have to think about that. I I'd love to sit down with Whoopi Goldberg for her part that she played in Ghost, the movie with Patrick Swayze. And I actually met Whoopi when I did The View a number of years ago. Um, and uh, one of the things that I wouldn't have to ask her, I had heard for quite some time after the movie came out, that from somebody who worked in L.A. and Hollywood and knew the screenwriter, that the screenwriter used my book ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists and one of Scott Rogo's books as research for the movie, which made sense to me because there were some things in the movie that just seemed like they came out of my book. And Whoopi verified that. She actually, as we were both in makeup for going on The View, she thanked me for her Oscar. She won Best Supporting Actress. And we talked very briefly. So I'd love to just have more of a conversation with her about that. Um, have to think about who else was in a movie. Have to think real hard, about that, because some of the people I'd really like to talk to are unfortunately are deceased. So I guess I could talk to them through a medium, perhaps, in some way. So ask me again next time. I'll try to think about somebody for that. Let's see. Pam Coronado is thinking about putting together a book for the police on how to work with psychics. That would be great. And maybe I'll contact her because there was a master's thesis written by a guy, and the book was published as Psychic Criminology, and it's a really good book on the background there. And there's some other information I actually have that Pam might not be privy to. Back when we had our parapsychology program, we sat down with two guys who were working with Ventura County DA's office and other law enforcement, and they were both ex-military. One of them had been involved in the Vietnam War, and he was actually in intelligence, and he could do remote viewing. The other one, interestingly enough, was working with major crimes, organized crimes groups for law enforcement, as an intuitive accountant. They'd show him the books from some business that might have been connected, and he could find the problems and would know when there was a second set of books, which is kind of interesting. The other guy wrote a paper on law enforcement and the legal side of psychic stuff, including working with psychics in general, because there's some legal considerations there as well. And he told us about, and this is actually true, and I know other psychics who have done this. He would sit down with DA and law enforcement, and they present some stuff to him, and he'd try to pick up the missing pieces. That's what would go on. Sometimes it would be predictive. So where is a major drug deal going to go down in our county? And he'd get out a map and he'd do a little precognitive remote viewing, and he pointed a place. And they wouldn't do anything. Then he would go outside to the street to a phone booth when there were phone booths. He'd pick up the phone, he'd call the tip line for law enforcement, and he'd give an anonymous tip that a drug deal was going down at such and such a warehouse at this location tonight at midnight or tomorrow, whenever else. So interestingly enough, if he had giving a psychic tip or saying it is a psychic tip, even on a tip line, is one way to get that disqualified as possible, probable cause for a warrant. But anonymous tips in general can be used if they fit in with what law enforcement is doing. So that was a genius thing. And I know other psychics who have done that as well. Let's see. Like, speaking of psychics helping solve crimes, with the release of the film Send Help, what do you think of Sam Raimi's other film? Is that The Gift? Is that one? I haven't seen it, so I guess I have to see it at some point. Yeah. There's an interesting movie called Suspect Zero. Ben Kingsley plays a remote viewer in that. There are a couple of other ones, a bunch of other films. Like I said, for the majority of time, I think the people who play psychics or involved in paranormal films are often either not interested, they're just taking a role. I think more likely, I'd rather talk to people who have had psychic experience and just kind of sit down and chat with them about their experiences, who are celebrities in that way. Tina, let's both send Pam an email. I'll try to remember to. In fact, I'll make a note to send Pam an email. I can even send her that paper, that legal paper that this guy Stan wrote so long ago. I think what's important, and I'm guessing Pam, because Pam's a really good remote viewer and a good psychic, is for whoever's in law enforcement to interview the psychic or whoever they're working with and find out first how they work, what they need. As an example, Annette, when she went on in cases, she actually worked with a homicide detective from Marin County Sheriff's Office. That's, in fact, how she got into law enforcement, because she spontaneously picked up on someone who was missing and actually led them to the body. And then he tested her in a couple of other cases, and she would tell and he would back her up, because they didn't want to do it. She would tell whoever the detectives were, tell me everything you already know. You know, he vouched for her that she wasn't going to reveal it to the press or anything like that. So she wanted to know everything they already knew, so she could focus on the things that they didn't know. That's the reason they were calling it a psychic to begin with. Kathleen Ray, Kay Ray, who was here in the Bay Area for quite some time, really good psychic. When she worked with police, it was typically assault cases, rape cases, murders, and sometimes theft. And it was often to determine, the question is, who done it? And she wouldn't want to know anything, nothing. She would want some piece of an article of the victim's clothing or jewelry or something else like that, something she could use to focus. And Alex Tannis sort of did this as well on occasion. He would put him, in Alex's case, he would occasionally put himself in the perspective of the victim, the murder victim. So he would actually experience being killed, more or less. In Kay's case, once she got her vibe, she would then sit down with a police sketch artist, and not knowing at all who the suspects are, or even what the crime was, she'd work with him to describe the suspect, the person to focus on, the perpetrator. And what she described, she said the majority of the time, the detective took one look at the picture the guy drew and said, okay, he was already on our radar, and we'll focus on him. And inevitably, they would focus on, they had several people of particular interest, let's put it that way, persons of interest. And by narrowing, it's kind of like in medical intuitive, by narrowing down where to focus, they still had to get the evidence for the DA to charge and convict. That's always the missing piece that you don't hear from psychics. But she had a really good track record as well. So this was a good thing, good topic to kind of get off on. There is a book you might be interested in reading. This is another one called The Mind at Large by Zofia Weaver, and I couldn't even pronounce Janowska's name. This is there was a Polish clairvoyant who compiled pulled his cases together, and he worked with a police sergeant in those 20 years. And this is kind of an accounting of the cases, a lot of information. It's kind of case files, a lot of information from the detective as well, and definitely worth reading. The police sergeant was the other author. So this is authored by someone in the field and a police officer. There's a book about Noreen Rainier, who is a psychic who, I think she still lives in Florida. Noreen worked quite a bit with law enforcement. She lectured at Quantico years ago as well. But she earned, and many of these folks earned, the ire of the pseudo-skeptics. So, who called her fake. All right. On the bookcase behind you, little blue people. The little blue people are the hitchhiking ghosts. That is a Christmas ornament. We happened to be walk by a Hallmark store, and they had 70% off, and I bought a Haunted Mansion Christmas ornament. And yeah, that's what that is next to the Marshmallow Man. And actually, the crystal ball is something I actually bought at Barnes and Noble. Let's see if I can get it to light up. Gotta find where the button is.
Wrap on a table. It's time to respond. Send us a message from somewhere.
I don't think you can probably hear that, but that is a laser etched picture of Madame Leota. It's unfortunate my producer's not here because he at Graveyard Grog has every Haunted Mansion Christmas ornament, including the mansion itself. He put it all together, and the fun thing is that they interact. The ornaments interact. They have a story to tell for those who have been to the Haunted Mansion in one of the 2 Disney places. All right, and Incarnate Paranormal. I'm glad that's a couple of books on your list as well. I mean, there are plenty of others. You're not seeing my library, which is mostly there. Most of the books in the bookcase here, you can see the paperbacks above, but most of the books are actually antiquarian books. So they're a bit older, you might say. Back when they were cheaper, now they're a lot more expensive. Let's see. You keep jumping into the tail end. Well, just remember, you still have time to ask question, and each of these is recorded, so you can always watch the recording. Incarnate, you have over 120 books on your list to get. Yeah. There are plenty of books that I still would like to pick up. I use most of these for reference, and I do have to read fiction quite a bit, just get my mind out of everything as well. And that's a whole different realm for me to begin with. And by the way, just to let you know, 2 of the books that you can see behind me, just next to, kind of above the shadow and the tick, there's a book called Near Death and a book called Afterlife. And those are books that I co-authored with Rich Hozek and Arnold Rudnick. And they are paranormal mystery novels. And we are working on a 3rd one right now called Farsight. So there's a lot of me in some of these books. Definitely, I'd say if you're interested in fiction, please buy our books. And there are also audiobooks of those as well. Let's see. Medic Jesus. I knew this would get things brewing. My grandmother was very gifted and worked with police, but behind the scenes. She helped the police, but did not look for publicity to complicate things. Yeah, because unfortunately, that does complicate things. The good thing about working with police, though, if they really trust you, Annette told me that she would get referrals for readings, clients from the police. So even if a psychic is working with police, and don't look for publicity, but get them to trust you so that when they hear people need help, they will point them to you. And it's just a way of networking in some respects. How do you feel about EVPs leading you to physical evidence? So I'm curious as to what you mean by that. What do the voices on the EVP tell you where to find physical evidence, or you have to explain a little bit more about what you mean by that? We'll just let that sit there until we get a response here. Anybody else have anything? We still have a few minutes left, about 8 or 9 minutes for this. I think my producer will be back in a couple weeks, but he may be running into some issues, and this may be how you see my show from now on, without the pretty borders and the things like that. We'll see what we can do down the road. But I'd rather make it easy than have to worry about too many tech things. It's always better to have somebody else worry about the tech than that. See, I'm 70, so I had a number of paranormal experiences. I know and have had more than anyone wants to hear from an old woman. Hey, don't call yourself old. We're contemporaries. But you enjoy the forensic approach. That's good. Do you own any crystals? I do, because they're pretty. And I used to collect rocks when I was a kid. I was what was called a rock hound when I was a kid. And in fact, even had a rock tumbler and would make jewelry for people when I was a teenager. So, but I don't give any power to those crystals. Crystals, any object that you want can have as much power as you want to give it. There have been studies of crystals. It's more of you call it a focal point, but not that the crystal itself has any power. Now, we do know that crystals can store information if the information gets into them properly. You can laser, like this laser etch of this particular item, which you can't really see very well, but there is the case that crystals can do that. But from a psychic perspective, it's really up to the individual who's using the crystals. It's their power. Just like when somebody does a great reading of tarot cards, it's not the cards at all. It's the cards are stimuli for their psychic abilities. It's not the cards. Cards are a good way to say, well, it's not my fault if I gave you bad news. Okay. You caught an EVP telling me to check the sink. Went back a year later after I analyzed the evidence. Sure enough, there was a piece of a knife wedged behind the sink. Excellent. Nevada State Prison. Yep. That's great. Usually that doesn't happen. You don't have that happen almost ever. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen. And so it's important to consider that if there's something that is you can follow up on, that's great. But so much of EVP is impossible to determine in so many ways. One of the former guards was there and confirmed it. Now here's an interesting one at Alcatraz. Annette Martin and I did a couple TV things there, and Annette didn't pick up any ghosts per se, no conscious entities in the prison itself, which makes perfect sense. Again, unless it's a guard who's going to stick around in the prison, the prisoners wanted to get out of there. And we did experience a lot of negative stuff, residual stuff, because it was negative emotion, but it wasn't conscious. We went to the guards area, like the guards village, and to other areas, the laundry room and other places. And she started communicating with a guy who was a prisoner in the laundry area. He died rather suddenly, and he told her about his name, his first name, and how he died, which was natural causes, but it was still, a death. And then, Annette talked to him, and he just wanted to be recognized that he was still there, and he was going to move on. So one of the park folks who was a little skeptical did some digging into the prisoners' names and mode of death if they died, and found the guy. Based on the description, it matched what Annette was seeing. His mode of death was what was described, and his first name was the same first name. So that can happen. Just kind of rare. Let's see. Never sought the experiences. They just happened. Never had interest in stimuli. Just happened, and was on spot in a few hours, minutes, or next day. Psychic abilities are not always accessible to people. There are times that psychics who are fairly good can't turn it on for whatever reason. There's something else in their mind. There's something else happening health-wise. There's something else that doesn't let them pick up psychic information. It's not something people can do 100% of the time. It comes up spontaneously for most people, unless you spend time trying to recognize what the patterns are, in which case you might be able to initiate it once you understand your patterns. That's part of what the course is that I teach a course on. It's called Developing Your Intuition, but it's really developing your ESP, usually in the summertime. And it's really about finding your patterns more than anything else to do that development. So some people have experiences constantly throughout their lives and never take advantage of them, or they take advantage of some, but not the others as well. Let's see. You've investigated 5 times. That's cool. And it freaked my friends and family out, but it comes true. They have to accept it. Never had these happen regularly. It's always about someone's safety. Yeah. That's another thing, is that one of the patterns sometimes is picking up on, the people we care about, connections that we actually have. And the other thing is that with precognition, things are not set in stone. There are many instances where people have gotten information either for themselves personally or for someone else, and just paying attention to that information changed the outcome, which makes you wonder, where did the information come from if the outcome's not the same? And are people going to believe you? That's the other thing that happens. You tell somebody something positive or negative is going to happen, and they do something different than they were going to do, and it doesn't happen, and they might be mad at you. So that can happen too. Let's see, last couple of things here. Had even worse experience locked and shackled in an execution chamber. Well, that's under the best of circumstances. I would say that's not the best. I wouldn't be a good experience in general, I think. Any explanation for items appearing in areas where they were already explored? No real good explanation. We have a category for things like this. Happens in people's homes too. Things disappear and reappear in different places, and we call them a case of JOTT, J-O-T-T, which stands for just one of those things. Some form of psychokinesis is doing that, but we don't exactly know who's doing it, why it's happening individually, and it really depends on the individual situation. Somebody could have been just playing tricks on people, for that matter. All right, last couple of things, because we're at the end here. From your experience, DC Amia, I think it is. From my experience, I've learned that it's one of those things that can happen or not happen or might happen 3,000 years from now. Yeah, that's the case with precognition in general. That's right. I always kind of paraphrase Yoda, and just to say the future is always in motion, or always in motion is the future, as Yoda would say, because we make decisions. And granted, there's some things that are going to happen or will, like an earthquake, physical things in the environment. But I want you to always remember that the one field with science, and it's a physical science that is all about prediction, is meteorology, studying the weather. And yet, with all the data they have with AI right now, they still can't predict the weather accurately. So I can probably predict the weather as well as anybody if we're talking about an hour from now, but 3 days from now, not so much. All right. So last couple of things here. Tina, first touchdown. That's great. All right. Well, I think we're just about at the hour now, and I do this pretty much every other week. So I'll be back in 2 weeks on February 22nd as well. Come back with your questions. You can also email questions to me, so I have them ready. You can send them to me. You'll find my email in the channel description, but I'll just give it to you right now. I'm going to throw in the one for this channel. It's just simply askprofparanormal@gmail.com. Or you can send one to just profparanormal, as in Professor Paranormal, @gmail.com. Or even a Loyd Auerbach @gmail.com. Just remember to spell my name with one L. All right. Thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the next couple of weeks. Take care.